I'm not ashamed to own my Lord, nor to defend his cause. Maintain the honors of his word, the glory of his cross.
If you would turn in your Bibles this evening to Acts chapter 2. We're going to be focusing on one verse in particular. But I'd like us to get this one verse and recognize that we are jumping into the middle of Peter's sermon on the day of Pentecost. And what he is quoting here is actually an Old Testament passage from Psalm 16, which if we went back and read Psalm 16, we would gain an understanding that King James Version confuses. And it's not that the King James Version gets it wrong. We'll discuss why the King James Version translates verse 27 the way it does. But our question this evening is, what does it mean that Jesus went to hell? Now, I don't know if anyone in the audience this evening has the King James Version, because it's really the only version that's going to have the word I'm looking for. Acts chapter 2, verse 27 in the King James Version says, "Because thou wilt not leave my soul in hell, neither wilt thou suffer thy Holy One to see corruption." And so, again, Peter is talking about Jesus. We know that because verse 22 says, "Men of Israel, hear these words, Jesus of Nazareth, a man attested by God to you by miracles, wonders, and signs, which God did through him in your midst, as you yourselves know." So Jesus is the topic. He's quoting, though, David. And Peter's making the point, it's not David in Psalm 16 that is the topic of discussion. And the reason we know it's not David is because David's dead. This passage is saying that whoever this Holy One is, God's not going to leave his soul, according to the King James Version, in hell, nor is he going to let the Holy One to see corruption. In other words, his body is not going to decay. And Peter's point is that David was a prophet. He knew that he was speaking about the Christ whom God would raise to sit on his throne. And so that's what David was talking about. That's what Peter's talking about. However, when we read of that word hell, we automatically think of what? What do we automatically think of? Where wicked people go. Yeah, it is a place of eternal punishment. That's it. We would say it was the opposite of heaven. A lot of people think that's true. And so we think, so that if the King James Version said, "You're not going to leave my soul in hell," speaking about Jesus, that's the question. Did Jesus go to hell for 3 days to suffer for sin as the payment for sin? And I know that there are some people who believe this. They believe that part of the price that Jesus had to pay was being in hell for the 3 days between his death and his resurrection. Because we read in the New Testament, wages of sin is death, that the wicked are going to be cast into hell. And then we read in 1 Corinthians, no, maybe that's not 1 Corinthians, but Jesus was made sin for us. So Jesus became a sinner on the cross, and therefore he deserved God's wrath. That means no such thing. Those are misinterpretations of those passages. Jesus became sin in the sense that he bore our sin. He bore the penalty for our sin, but he did not become a sinner. Therefore, he did not deserve to go to hell. even though he died for sin. But, so the scriptures do not teach that Jesus went to hell. And you might say, well, if I'm reading the King James Version, or if I'm just reading any version, how can I know that? Well, remember a few weeks ago we talked about how to properly study the Bible. And we said one way that you can use to study the Bible is when you run across a hard passage or a passage you don't quite understand, go to another version. Read a few versions. Don't get married to the translation that you always read. There are a lot of people who think the King James Version is the be-all and end-all version. It's not. But neither is the New King James, neither is the English Standard, the New American Standard. All of these other versions, they're translations. And I'm not saying that all of them are bad. In fact, the more translations we have, the more we can understand what the Word of God is actually saying. If we read in the English Standard Version, Acts 2:27, it says, "You will not abandon my soul in Hades, or let your Holy One see corruption." The English Standard Version is essentially a word-for-word translation. And what that means is that wherever possible, it's just a basic translation. This word is this word is this. You have to come along and change the grammar in English. And where a Hebrew or Greek idiom, figure of speech, is used, you have to come up with an equivalent for that. Or where there isn't an English word, you have to come up with an equivalent. So if I was saying in English, it's raining cats and dogs, and I just translated that into Mandarin, word for word, Henry's probably going to give me a weird look, saying, what do you mean it's raining literal cats and dogs? That's not going to make sense. Because in English, the English idiom, it's raining cats and dogs, means it's raining heavily. And so, if I want to get that across in another language, I'm going to have to say it's raining heavily. But if I say that Naomi walked up the street, I could translate that into Mandarin word for word. It's a basic sentence. Naomi walked up the street. That's what the ESV does. It uses the word, instead of hell, it uses the word Hades there. And we'll get into that in a moment. If we read the NIV, which is the New International Version, the NIV I don't like to read that often because it has some problems in some places concerning salvation. But the NIV shouldn't just be cast aside as a nothing translation. There are some uses for it. Let's read Acts 2:27 from it. "Because you will not abandon me to the grave, nor will you let your Holy One see decay." The NIV tries to strike a balance between word for word and thought for thought. It's somewhere in the middle. And you have to be careful with thought for thought translations, because even though they make harder words easier to understand, they do sometimes make interpretations of what the verse actually says. And if you don't know that the NIV is doing that, or you don't know that the NIV follows that type of translation, you could come away reading the NIV version, coming away with some semblance of false doctrine maybe in the back of your head. You could, if you read the entire Bible from the NIV, know what the Bible's teaching. But if you read just maybe the book of Romans, you might come away thinking about salvation by faith alone. But the NIV here does make it simple to understand what Peter's saying. He's saying that God would not allow Jesus' soul to remain in the grave. So it doesn't use that word Hades there, where we may not understand what it means, he uses the word grave. So basically, you'll not allow Jesus to remain dead, nor will you allow your Holy One to see corruption. You are going to raise him from the dead. Now, if we were writing this in Hebrew, we would use the Hebrew word Sheol for Hades, S-H-E-O-L, for Hades. And Sheol means resting place of the spirit. And that's what you would read in Psalms. You would not leave my soul in Sheol. The word Hades, which is translated in many English versions, including the ESV, gives the same meaning as the NIV's grave and the Hebrew word Sheol. We know this to be correct because the Greek word that is used in Acts 2:27 is the word Hades, spelled H-A-I-D-E-S, which we say is Hades, but Greek would say Hades. Remember when we were studying the Bible, or how to study the Bible, sometimes going to the Greek and Hebrew, looking up the word, understanding what it means. Good way to understand. And the word Hades means the place of departed souls. You sometimes can hear about it in Greek mythology, talking about the Greek god Hades, and he's supposed to be the overlord of the dead, over the realm of the dead. But leaving that aside, Hades means place of departed souls. Meanwhile, hell is the place of eternal punishment. It's translated from the Greek word Gehenna, spelled G-E-N-A, G-E-E-N-A. And it's translated like this. Naomi, you want to get Matthew 10:28.
And do not fear those who kill the body, but cannot kill the soul. Rather fear him who can destroy both soul and body in hell.
Okay, so the Greek word used there is Gehenna, is hell. And so we can know from the Hebrew and the Greek what is meant. You might say, Jeremy, I'm not a Greek scholar. I'm not a Hebrew scholar. And you know what? I'm not either. So how can I know, without consulting the Greek, that Jesus went to this place of the dead and not to hell? Well, now let's go and do what we said in our Bible study lesson from a few weeks ago, and read some other passages that might help us out. Remember, the book of Acts is written by who? Which of our gospel writers wrote the book of Acts? Luke. So it might be a good idea, if we were going to consult a gospel, to go to the book of Luke and take a look at how Luke uses Jesus' sayings to talk about the realm of the dead. Because Luke does talk about that. Let's go to Luke chapter 23. Luke chapter 23, Jesus is hanging on the cross. He is talking to the thief on the cross. Henry, you want to get Luke 23, 39 to 43.
Then one of the criminals who were hanged blasphemed him, "See, if you are the Christ, show yourself on us." But the other answering rebuked him, saying, "Do you not even fear God? See, you are under sin condemnation, and we indeed justly, for we receive the due reward of our deeds. But this man has done nothing wrong." Then they said to Jesus, "Lord, remember me when you come into your kingdom." And Jesus said to him, "Assuredly, I say to you, today you will be with me in paradise." Now it was about 6 hours.
That's as far as I want you to go. Today you'll be with me in paradise. That's where Jesus was saying that he was going to be. Now, what's this place called? Paradise. That's sort of, we're coming to the end of the book of Luke. Luke introduces this place in one of Jesus' parables. Let's go back to Luke 16. Luke chapter 16. We're going to read 19 to 31. Naomi, you want to get verses 19 to 25, and Henry 26 to 31.
There was a rich man who was clothed in purple and fine linen, and who feasted sumptuously every day. And at his gate was laid a poor man named Lazarus, covered with sores, who desired to be fed with what fell from the rich man's table. Moreover, even the dogs came and licked his sores. The poor man died and was carried by the angels to Abraham's side. The rich man also died and was buried, and in Hades, being in torment, he lifted up his eyes and saw Abraham far off, and Lazarus at his side. And he called out, Father Abraham, have mercy on me, and send Lazarus to dip the end of his finger in water, and cool my tongue, for I am in anguish in this flame. But Abraham said, Child, remember that you in your lifetime received your good things, and Lazarus in like manner bad things. But now he is comforted here, and you are in anguish.
And besides all this, between us and you there is a great gulf fixed, so that those who want to pass from here to you cannot, nor can those from this pass to us. Then he said, I beg you therefore, Father, that you would send him to my father's house. For I have 5 brothers, and they may testify to thee, lest they also came to this place of torment. Abraham said to him, They have Moses and the prophets, and they may hear them. And he said, No, Father Abraham, but if one goes to them for the dead, they will repent. But he said to him, If they do not hear Moses and the prophets, neither will they be persuaded through one voice from the dead.
Okay. This is a parable, the story of the rich man and Lazarus. Jesus is giving us a peek behind the curtain of death. We talked about this a couple weeks ago when we talked about what happens when we die. Jesus gives us a peek. We don't know everything. But we do know that Jesus said there's a place called Hades, and it is divided into 2 parts. One is called the place of torments, and the other is called in this parable Abraham's bosom. But from everything that is described here, this is paradise. We discussed a couple weeks ago that this was not heaven and hell. This was the realm of the dead. This was the realm of departed souls. Souls that are awaiting the resurrection day. The evil and the just will be raised on the resurrection day. Everyone will receive a spiritual body. Now, those who are going to be cast into hell are going to receive a spiritual body to be in that place. But those who are going to be in heaven will receive a spiritual body to be in that place. And so everyone receives a spiritual body, but here it appears that souls are still conscious as far as they know who they are. They know what's going on, but they're in this place awaiting the resurrection day. And this is to us, probably a weird story. You have this man, Lazarus, over here, and he's in Abraham's bosom. And for the rich man, he's being tormented, and he sees Abraham. And he wants Abraham to send Lazarus just to dip some water to cool his tongue. He's in torments. And Jesus is describing this place in a way that we would understand. And Jesus is saying, or Abraham says, no, I can't do that. Because there's a great gulf fixed in between us. In other words, there's a divide. We can't pass from one to the other. You can't pass to us. We can't pass to you. And then the rich man says, well, send Lazarus back from the dead then, as if Abraham had that power. but send Lazarus back from the dead. Let him teach my brothers so they don't come to this place. Abraham said they had Moses and the prophets. It's interesting that Jesus ascribes Moses and the prophets to Abraham because Abraham lived before Moses. But they have Moses and the prophets. The rich man says, well, they won't listen to Moses and the prophets. Well, if they won't listen to Moses and the prophets, they won't listen to one as if he rose from the dead. And we can know that because people today don't believe Jesus, even though he rose from the dead. If they won't hear the Bible, they won't hear for any miracle that might come to pass. So this is what happens at death. When Jesus said, today you will be with me in paradise, talking to the thief on the cross, which realm in Hades was he referring to? Abraham's bosom or the place of torments? What does that sound like to you? Abraham's bosom. Not going to be the place of torments. So even though Hades is not even hell, Jesus isn't going even to what we would call the bad place in Hades. He's not going to hell, the place of eternal punishment. He's not going to the place of torments in Hades, the place of temporal punishment. We might say it's punishment for a time until the resurrection day. Jesus isn't going there. He's going to a place of paradise. And that should tell us something about whether Jesus became a sinner on the cross. People who die in sins don't go to paradise. The story of the rich man and Lazarus tells us that. So, we don't have to know Greek. We don't have to know Hebrew. We can read the scriptures. We read all of it, and we can answer our question. We can know that. And that's why studying scripture is important. That's why writing our questions down that we have when we read the scriptures is important. We may find the answer in a book. We may not. We may have to go to another book. But knowing that the Gospel of Luke and the book of Acts are written by the same person gives us an opportunity to know, okay, Luke wrote both books. Maybe he dealt with what he's talking about here in this hard passage in the book of Luke. Because the book of Luke in the King James Version doesn't say Jesus went to hell. He didn't tell the thief on the cross, today you'll be with me in hell. No. It still says, today you'll be with me in paradise. That is the case even in the King James Version. So even in the King James Version, I can know Jesus didn't go to hell. But before we're done this evening, I'd like to answer one question. Why does the King James Version translate the Greek word Hades as hell? Because we come along and say, well, the King James Version got it wrong. And that's not true. The King James Version didn't get it wrong. How old? Do we know how old the King James Version is? About?
400.
Pardon me?
400 years.
About 400 years. Yeah, 1611. And that's the original King James Version. Of course, the King James Version, if you actually read the King James Version from 1611, you'd have a tough time reading it because English was spelled a lot differently. Even if you read really old Shakespeare, like I'm talking really old Shakespeare, people have enough trouble reading Shakespeare today. Try going and read English 400 years ago. Words were spelled differently, they were said differently, and they carried different meanings. The word gay, 60 years ago, did not mean homosexual. It meant happy. And if you said 60 years ago, I'm feeling gay today, you wouldn't be saying I'm feeling homosexual today. I'm feeling happy today. If you said that in 2022, I feel gay today, you were talking about homosexuality. the word has changed. Does that happen in Mandarin too, Henry, when it comes to different words that at certain times different words had different meanings?
Yeah,
Meanings changed, even though the word's the same? Okay. That's because we live, the word we have, the language we speak is a living language. If we were able to live 200 or 300 years into the future, I'll bet you we would not be able to read even if English was spoken, the English then. Think about texting language and all the short forms we use when we text. Thanks, THX. Might there be a time in the future when thanks actually is spelled THX in our writing? We get rid of THANKS and we just spell it THX? Might there be certain short forms that we use, how words are contracted down and they actually mean the same thing, but are spelled differently? That's what happens in the King James Version. The word hell comes from the Saxon word helon, Helan, meaning covered, deep place. That's what the word hell meant in the King James Version. However, as I said, the English is a living language, and so the meaning of hell has changed to almost exclusively mean the place of eternal punishment. Now, unfortunately, the King James Version also translates the Greek word Gehenna as hell, which of course can lead to confusion. But it's not the King James' fault that Acts 2:27 is written as hell. And we shouldn't fault the King James. We can go to Acts chapter 12 and fault it for translating Passover as Easter, because Herod didn't celebrate Easter. The Jews celebrated Passover, and that's when James was killed and Peter imprisoned. It was not at Easter. King James translated it as Easter because by the time the King James Version was written, we had the celebration of Easter by the Roman Catholic Church and the Anglican Church, and that'd be the Church of England. And I don't know if the Church of England was around in 1611. Zach would have to tell me on that. But anyway, Easter was celebrated by quote-unquote Christian denominations. And so when the King James Version talks about Easter, every other version puts Passover correctly in that verse. But in Acts 2:27, when the King James Version uses hell, it's using it correctly, but the word has changed. Jesus did not go to hell. He went to the place of paradise, awaiting his resurrection 3 days later.
I'm not